Hello friends, today we will discuss about a traumatic brain injury. We will discuss how to approach the patients with a traumatic brain injury. First, initial assessment should start with the simultaneous starting of a treatment with necessary imaging. We have to follow the ATLS protocols. First we have to do triage of the patients. Next, primary survey. Primary survey that we will do that A, B, C, D, E. Then resuscitation. Then we have to transfer the patient to the specialized center. Then after that we can do the secondary survey. Then continue the post resuscitation evaluation of the patient. Then definitive care of the patient like surgery, etc. So it consists of like a pre-hospital phase and a hospital phase. So in the pre-hospital phase, the main thing is we have to take care of airway, that is airway maintenance, and we have to control the bleeding and control the shock state and immobilize the patient and transfer them to the hospital. So we have the pre-hospital personnel should notify the hospital regarding the time of injury, the events related to injury, and also the patient history in the hospital phase. So first of all, in the hospital, on arrival, we have to perform visual scan for any injuries, external injury or internal injury. Then obtain a history from the pre-hospital personnel who brought the patient to the hospital. So primary survey, it consists of A, B, C, D, E. That is first A, airway maintenance with cervical spine control. So we have to always protect the cervical spine, and also look for any chest wall movements, nasal flaring, retraction. Then look for any breath sound, abnormal breath sound, stridor, and obstructed ventilation. The next step is B. B for breathing. If a patient is having a desaturation, give supplemental oxygen. Check the patient is getting adequate ventilation, and also inspect the chest to exclude any open pneumothorax or any flail segment. Then also auscultate chest sound. If there is respiratory failure, then provide assisted ventilation. Next, C is for circulation. For that, you have to establish the venous access, and also you have to check the peripheral pulse. Then if there is a hypovolemia, then correct hypovolemia, and also obtain blood samples for HbCbC. Then you have to grade the shock according to vital signs. Then D for disability. You have to assess the patient according to the mnemonic AVPU. That is, A for the patient is alert, V for the patient is responding to vocal stimulus, and P for the patient is responsive only to the painful stimulus, and U for the patient is not responsive. So next, in the D, you have to assess the pupillary response to light, whether is pupils are equally reacting to light or not. Then E for exposure for complete examination. Then only we will start. Then after this ABCD, we will start with the resuscitation, secondary survey, then definitive care. So always our airway, breathing, circulation should take care of, and the BP and check peripheries are warm and well perfused, and check the level of consciousness, pupils, and also posture of the patient for neurological dysfunction. So if we assess the Glasgow coma scale, according to Glasgow coma scale, if GCS is less than 8, then the patient will be having severe head injury. If it is GCS is from 8 to 12, moderate head injury, and GCS is from 13 to 15, it is a mild head injury. Always intubate the patient with GCS less than 8, but before intubation, check for reversible causes of low GCS like hypotension, hypoxia, and alcohol intoxication before the before intubating the patient. So if GCS is less than 8, it indicates that the patient is having severe traumatic brain injury with intracranial pressure is more than 20. So normally the intracranial pressure is between 10 to 15. If it is if it goes above 20, we have to intubate the patients. then intubate the patient if the patient is having hemorrhagic shock, and also if we need the patient to shift to any imaging or surgery, then you have to do prompt intubation, and we have to start the ventilation. In all the trauma patient, please protect the cervical spine, and usually intubation, orotracheal intubation is carried out with direct laryngoscopy with manual inline stabilization, and this manual inline stabilization is carried out by grasping the mastoid process. So during this emergency, we can intubate with fentanyl, analgesic, thiopentone 150 to 200 mg, and propofol 100 mg. So in maxillofacial trauma, as orotracheal intubation is not possible, then perform surgical cricothyroidotomy or surgical tracheostomy. Ryle's tube via oral orogastric route only. And in trauma, always do rapid sequence intubation. Apply correct cricoid pressure, that is 40 newtons pressure, to avoid aspiration. Sometimes we can use IV lignocaine to reduce the intracranial pressure, but this is not widely used actually. And basilar skull fracture is always associated with some cranial nerve injuries, CSF leak, and intracranial air. Usually in a head injury patient, avoid nasal intubation because it will cause a cerebral infection. And also hemorrhage in trauma is the preventable death after injury. So the hemorrhage should be taken care of. So the external hemorrhage can be managed with direct pressure or tourniquet or any hemostatic agent. So in order to assess the internal hemorrhage, we can do the FAST test. So the FAST assessment of sonography for a trauma, or direct or a DPL, that is a direct peritoneal lavage, to find out any internal hemorrhage. If there is an internal hemorrhage, then apply chest compression or pelvic binders or splint application, and definitive care of our internal hemorrhage will be sorry, surgical intervention. So up to 30% of the blood loss in a trauma is replaced with crystalloids or a colloid. Then after that, we have to transfuse with O negative blood group until the blood arrives, and then with a matched blood group. So then what are the other adjuncts or monitoring methods adjunct to primary survey? They are like ECG, then urinary and gastric catheters, BP, pulse ox, FAST, and DPL. Then we have to assess the ventilatory rate and ABG. Next, we will see what is a FAST. That is a fast assessment of sonography for a trauma. In this, we use a low frequency transducer, low frequency ultrasound probe. It contains 4 views. First is a pericardial view. Then second is a right upper quadrant view, to include the diaphragm and the liver interface if there is any hemorrhages in the Morrison's pouch. Then left upper quadrant view, to include the spleen diaphragmatic interface and spleen kidney interface, and then suprapubic view. So totally in FAST, pericardial view, right upper quadrant, left upper quadrant, and suprapubic view. So diagnostic peritoneal lavage. In this, we are taking incision below the umbilicus, and we are inserting the catheter by Seldinger technique. Infuse 1 liter of fluid. Then adequate fluid return should be more than 20% of the infused volume. So if you grossly aspirate any 10 ml of the blood, then proceed to laparotomy. So the positive test for diagnostic peritoneal lavage means that is 1 lakh RBCs per millimeter cube, or WBCs should be 500 per millimeter cube, or a positive gram stain for any food fibers or any bacteria. Then we will discuss about a primary brain injury and secondary brain injury. So primary brain injury means it is a direct injury to the brain at the time of trauma. It includes like a contusion, damage of blood vessels, or axonal shearing. Meninges and blood-brain barriers are damaged, and neuronal death occur. For example, intracerebral hemorrhage, subdural, subarachnoid, epidural, and cerebral laceration. These are the direct brain injury or primary brain injury. Secondary, how does the secondary brain injury occur? So it is due to ischemia caused by low BP and cerebral swelling caused by hypoxia, high CO2, and venous congestion, and eventually increased intracranial pressure. So prolonged hypotension and hypoxia will increase the mortality from the severe head injury. So we should not allow the hypotension or hypoxia, or we should not allow the PaCO2 to go more higher. It will cause a cerebral vasodilation, increased ICP, and eventually neuronal damage. So traumatic brain injury in head trauma is GCS is from 3 to 8. So what are the causes for a secondary brain injury? That is already said. Already, as I said, that is like a cerebral edema, impaired metabolism, altered cerebral blood flow, free radical formation, excitotoxicity, hypoxia, hypotension, hypercapnia, hypoglycemia, hydrocephalus, increased intracranial tension, vasospasm, metabolic derangement, calcium ions, infections, seizures, and toxicity. Then we will see little about excitotoxicity. That is excitotoxicity is that is release of glutamate from the neuronal cells that leads to increased concentration of the glutamate in the CSF. As we all know, the glutamate is a neurotransmitter. It will stimulate the glutamate receptor stimulation and increase in the intracellular calcium ion, and this released calcium ion in turn will activate a protein kinases, phospholipids, and other enzymes, leads to proteolysis, free radical formation, lipid peroxidation, DNA damage, and eventually neuronal death. This is all about excitotoxicity. Okay, so next we will see about what are the factors. So next we will see about a cerebral perfusion pressure. Cerebral perfusion pressure is the that is a mean or that is intracranial pressure subtracted from mean arterial pressure. So the normal cerebral perfusion pressure should be at least 70. Okay, so suppose in a head injury patient, if intracranial pressure is high and mean arterial pressure is low, then the cerebral perfusion pressure will be low, and this will lead to neuronal death. So what are the factors affecting the cerebral perfusion pressure? As we all know, the cranium is the rigid box. It contains a brain tissue, that is 80% of brain tissue, 12% will be the blood, and 8% will be the CSF. The normal intracranial pressure is 5 to 13. Suppose if there is increased intracranial pressure, the CSF will be pushed out or forced to move out outside of the skull. With a further increase in the ICP, what will happen? The more venous blood and the CSF will be forced to move out of the skull. This is a compensatory mechanism. If this compensatory mechanism fail, then there will be an abrupt increase in the ICP. So what will happen? There will be an so the cerebral perfusion pressure will be decreased if there is a decrease in the mean arterial pressure. Okay, so during anesthesia, the ICP is raised. So the fall in BP during anesthesia should be avoided, and we can avoid it by volume replacement or vasopressors. When cerebral perfusion pressure is inadequate, then we can do the jugular venous oxygen saturation. So we can do that test. If cerebral perfusion pressure should be always more than 60. For this, we have to keep the mean arterial pressure more than 90. Then next we will see about cerebral blood flow. The normal cerebral blood flow is between 45 to 50 ml per 100 gram per minute. So in this, the white matter has a 20 ml per 100 gram per minute, and gray matter is having 70 ml per 100 gram per minute. So averagely it is 45 to 50 ml per 100 gram per minute. When this cerebral blood flow falls below 20, the neuronal cell physiological functions will begin to fail. In decompensated brain, increase or decrease in the BP will lead to sudden rise or fall in the cerebral perfusion pressure. So there will be like auto regulation is going on in the inside the brain. There is a cerebral blood flow is maintained between the mean arterial pressure of 50 to 150. So in the traumatized brain or the decompensated brain, what will happen? This auto regulation will eventually fail. So the cerebral perfusion pressure, which is depending on the cerebral blood flow, will won't be like it will fall drastically. So the cerebral perfusion pressure will fall, and if it falls below 60 or 70, then there will be like inadequate cerebral perfusion. So in a long-term ventilation, mild hypocapnia can be induced of around like 34 to 38, not more than this. Then we will say about a triphasic response to head injury. First, there will be like polyuria with raised sodium, and second there will be like oliguria due to SiADH, and third there will be like normal urea or polyuria response again. This is due to hypothalamic dysfunction, later release of vasopressin, and lastly due to like a complete depletion of vasopressin. This happens in this is a triple response that happens in a head injury. Okay, then. Okay, for example, if the patient is having extradural hemorrhage, so then okay, next if traumatic brain injury patient, if they are diagnosed with extradural hemorrhage, and the surgeons, if they are going plan to operate, then what is our management as an anesthesiologist? So we have to always preload with saline before the induction of anesthesia. Hypotension should be avoided, and if after the fluid therapy, if there is a hypotension, then we can start a small dose of vasopressors. If mean arterial pressure is low, then immediately we have to start the vasopressors. So what are the monitors that we use? Like usual monitors, ECG, pulse ox, temperature, end tidal CO2. And also we have to put invasive arterial BP to maintain the cerebral perfusion pressure, and also we can titrate the vasopressor and fluid therapy. Central venous access is also mandatory. Yes, it will allow the infusion of vasopressors, as well as it will allow us to monitor the volume status. And also ICP monitoring is extremely useful, both intraoperatively and post-operatively. And urine output is a surrogate marker of perfusion, and mannitol can be used in control of intracranial pressure. So the inhalational agent, we should not use MAC more than 1, as it will cause cerebral vasodilation and increase in ICP. So we have to avoid inhalational agent of MAC more than 1. Nitrous oxide is contraindicated. Indicated. So what is the ventilation strategy we have to use for this? First of all, adequate oxygenation. Then we have to prevent the increase in the cerebral blood flow. For this, we have to prevent the increase in PaCO2. For prevention of increase in PaCO2, we will use intermittent positive pressure ventilation, and we will keep the PaCO2 in the range of 35 mm mercury, and like we can do moderate hyperventilation. Then we can use a two agent, that is a mannitol and hypertonic saline for decreasing the intracranial pressure. So the mannitol is available as a 20% weight per volume, that is a 20 gram per 100 ml. So how the mannitol works? It works by two mechanisms of action. One is a plasma expansion. By plasma expansion, it will reduce the hematocrit, it will decrease the viscosity, and thereby the increased cerebral blood flow, and also there will be like increased cerebral oxygen delivery. And the second effect is osmotic effect. It will take at least 30 minutes to start, and it will last for 90 minutes to 6 hours. Then hypertonic saline. The hypertonic saline causes osmotic mobilization of the water across the blood-brain barrier, and it reduces the cerebral water. That is, it brings the water from the cerebral tissue to the vascular space. So thus it reducing the cerebral water content, dehydrates the endothelial cells and erythrocytes, thus increasing the blood flow, and also it decreases the leukocyte addition. Always check the sodium before a hypertonic saline, and also in some patients hypertonic saline will aggravate the pulmonary edema with underlying cardiac or pulmonary problems. We have to absolutely avoid dextrose containing solution, as it will increase the cerebral edema and increase in intracranial pressure. For head injury patient, the normal saline is the fluid of choice. Then after that, we can arrange for blood products to treat the hypovolemia due to major blood loss. So what are the predictors of outcome? Like age is one of the predictor, and CT scan diagnosis, then a GCS score, pupillary activity, and hypotension. These are the predictors of outcome in head injury. So in head injury, we can do advanced monitoring like intracranial pressure monitoring, jugular bulb venous oxygen saturation, brain tissue oxygen tension, transcranial Doppler ultrasonography, brain temperature, all these things. I don't know whether all these things can be done in all the places. This can be done only in the sophisticated places. So, what are the physiological effect of increased intracranial pressure? So, the patient will be having a Cushing reflex. So there is a hypertension, bradycardia, and wide pulse pressure. Then they will be having they will be having like decreased cerebral perfusion pressure due to increased ICP. So how to manage the patients with increased ICT? First of all, if the patient is having GCS less than 8, we have to protect the airway by intubation, and we can use for a short time we can use a therapeutic hyperventilation to maintain the normal PaCO2 to reduce the intracranial pressure. Then how to maintain the cerebral perfusion pressure? For maintaining the cerebral perfusion pressure, we have to maintain the adequate mean arterial pressure and decrease the intracranial pressure to maintain the cerebral perfusion pressure of 60 to 70 with adequate fluid resuscitation and vasopressor support. Then we have to avoid vasodilators such as diazoxide, hydralazine, nitroglycerin, and nitroprusside. So mannitol can be given as a 0.5 to 1 gram per kilogram bolus and repeated every 6 to 8 hours to maintain the serum osmolality more than 310. And also furosemide, it will increase the intravascular oncotic pressure. Thus, it will reduce the cerebral edema and CSF protection, and the urine output should be matched with the crystalloid replacement. So we are using normal saline is the fluid of choice, and hypertonic saline will increase the serum osmolarity, expands both the intravascular volume, thus improving the cerebral blood flow and decreases the cerebral edema. So hypothermia should be avoided because hypothermia will mediate the apoptosis, coagulopathy, and electrolyte abnormalities. There is no role of steroid for a head injury patient. Good glycemic control should be achieved. Then 15 to 30 degree head elevation and neck maintained in the midline position, which will facilitate the venous return. Then sedation and analgesia in a head injury patient. So pain and agitation should be avoided because it will cause increase in intracranial pressure. So benzodiazepine and propofol will increase the seizure threshold. So we can use benzodiazepine and propofol, and we can use barbiturates in place of refractory intracranial tension and uncontrolled seizure. Continuous EEG monitoring is necessary with barbiturate infusions. Then in severe cases, we can go for a decompressive craniectomy, that is bone and brain removal in patients with severe raised intracranial pressure. Suppose if the brain injury patient is having a subdural hematoma with a thickness of 10 mm and a midline shift of 5 mm, it should be evacuated. And also if a comatose patient with hematoma less than 10 mm or midline shift of less than 5 mm should undergo surgery if their GCC decreases by 2 points from admission. And also there are patients with asymmetric with ICP of more than 20. Extradural hematoma, especially in extradural hematoma, if volume is more than 30 centimeter, it should be surgically evacuated. If volume is less than 30, that is thickness less than 15 and less than 5 mm midline shift, GCs of more than 8 without any neurological deficit can be managed conservatively. Okay, the GCS less than 9 with anisocoria should be operated immediately. So for brain injury patients with like traumatic parenchymal lesions with neurological deterioration, medically refractory raised intracranial pressure or any signs of mass effect on a CT scan, GC score of 6 to 8 with frontal and temporal conditions greater than 20 centimeter, midline shift of 5 mm, cysternal compression of CT scans, lesions greater than 50 centimeter should be operated. So the parenchymal lesions with no evidence of any neurological compromise or controlled intracranial pressure or any no mass effect, they can be managed non-operatively. So if there is like a diffuse axonal injury with intracranial tension refractory to medical management, then we have to go for bifrontal decompressive craniotomy. And also if there is like a subtemporal decompression and hemispheric decompressive craniectomy are used for patients with refractory intracranial tension and diffuse axonal injury. Then posterior fossa lesions, we have to recommend suboccipital craniectomy with mass effect on CT scan or neurological dysfunction. We can use phenytoin as the short-term prophylaxis for seizure prevention. So, like, what is a post-operative care? After evacuation of extradural hemorrhage, the patient can be extubated wide awake. In diffuse axonal injury, we have to wait for a longer period because the peak brain edema will take 24 to 72 hours to occur. So, what is the care in post anesthesia care unit? We have to prevent the secondary injuries that might cause a cerebral edema, provide adequate analgesia, and observe for any further deterioration. In postoperative weight, don't start any low molecular weight heparin, and phenytoin is started with the IV loading dose and it can be stopped after 7 days. So, what is the take-home message? So, we have to maintain the systolic BP of more than 100 in 50 to 69 years of age group, and a systolic BP of more than 110 in 15 to 49 or over the 70 years age group. We have to maintain the avoid oxygen desaturation to less than 90, and also we have to treat if intracranial pressure is more than 20 to 25, then cerebral perfusion pressure is maintained at 60 to 70, and prolonged hyperventilation is not at all recommended. Only the brief PaCO2 less than 25 to control the ICP. We can use mannitol is effective in controlling the intracranial pressure. High dose barbiturate administration is recommended to control of ICP, and steroids are not at all recommended in head injury patients. By the 5th day we can start feeding, that is transgastric jejunal feeding can be started. Then prophylaxis for seizures with carbamazepine and phenytoin. Then large frontotemporo parietal decompressive craniectomy is recommended over small frontotemporoparietal for reduction of mortality, and prophylactic hypothermia is not at all recommended. So we can use the CSF drainage to lower the ICP with the GCs of less than 6. Then actually initial assessment and resuscitation is vital in the head injury patient. So anesthetic management, we have to aim to bring back the normal physiological and pharmacology, and the prompt and appropriate management will improve the outcome. Thank you for watching this video. Have a nice day. Bye.